Section 9.6 is using the quadratic formula and finding the discriminant. The quadratic formula is this formula up at the top. It says I'm going to do the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Notice that there's an extra set of parentheses in here, so you may want to put in that set of parentheses around the 4ac, and you may want to put in another parentheses around the 2a. Okay, let's see how we can use this. So here's my first quadratic equation. It says x squared minus 2x minus 8 equals 0. If you remember, I had the a in front of the x squared, the b in front of the x, and the c's by itself. So I went ahead and labeled those. We're going to use a template for this first worksheet to try and get us used to how to set it up. So I went ahead and I put in positive 1 for my A, and then I put in negative 2 for my B, and I put in negative 8 for my C. So noticing that this is helping me figure out what is A, B, and C. Then the next step in my template is plugging in those numbers where they go. So B was negative 2, so I put that in there. B goes here. A was 1. C is negative 8, and then A down here was 1. So this is just helping you figure out how to put stuff in, and then our goal will be that we want to not use this and try and write it on our own. Okay? But for these first worksheet, we're going to use this to try and guide us. So now what we're going to do is start using some order of operations. So we're going to do the opposite of negative 2, which is positive 2. Plus or minus the square root. Now I just rewrote this part over here, but you're going to put parentheses around the negative 2, and then we're going to put our extra set of parentheses around that 4ac. So then, and then we went ahead and multiplied the bottom and did 2 times 1 and got 2. So on your calculators, we're going to try and do it in 3 steps. We're going to do this first step where we do the opposite. We're going to type in this long string here to find what's underneath the radical, and then we're going to multiply here. So multiplying in 3 steps. So we did the 2, so now I'm going to type this in. So I'm going to have negative 2 squared, and then I'm going to do minus with my parentheses 4, 1, negative 8, and then I need to close that parenthesis. So that's why underneath the radical we're going to end up with 36. So again, we're going to try and do it in 3 steps before we start doing all of them together. Okay? So we're going to plug stuff in, and then we're going to type in this whole thing and then do our square root. So now I have 2 plus or minus the square root of 36 over 2. So my next step would be doing the square root of 36. So if you don't know it, you would type it in. So I would do square root of 36, which is 6. So now I have this equation, which is 2 plus or minus 6 over 2. This plus or minus is indicating that I actually have 2 problems. It's just condensed down. So your next step will be where you want to actually write it out in 2 steps. So the first one would be where I do 2 plus 6 and divide it by 2. And then the second one will be when I do 2 minus 6 and divide by 2. So we're just taking this plus or minus and splitting it into the 2 problems. Now we're going to do the rest of the problem. So we're going to do 2 plus 6, which becomes 8. And then I'm going to divide that 8 by 2, and I get 4. Same thing over here. I'm going to do 2 minus 6, which is negative 4. And then I'm going to divide by 2 and get negative 2. So all of these problems, you should end up with 2 answers, because a quadratic equation most of the time ends up with 2 answers. Okay? So for these, making sure that you always end up with those 2 answers, that's what that plus or minus is indicating. Alright, you're going to pause the video and see if you can do the next question. Alright, so on the next question, we have 4x squared minus 8x plus 3. So my 4 is the A, my B is negative 8, and my C is 3. So my first job is just putting them in and making sure I have them in the right spot. Okay? Now we're going to come over and we're going to do our 3 steps. So I do the opposite of negative 8, so positive 8. Then I'm going to type in this part. So in my calculator, I would type in negative 8 squared minus 4 times 4 times 3. So I got 16. Then I'm going to do the bottom where I do 2 times 4. 2 times 4 is 8. So there are my 3 steps that I need to do. Now I'm going to find the square root of 16, which should be 4. And then I'm going to split this problem now so that I have 2 problems. So I'm going to do 8 plus 4 and then 8 minus 4 on top. Now is where we actually solve. So 8 plus 4 is 12 over 8. 8 minus 4 is 4 over 8. These will reduce. So if you wanted to, you could just put them into your calculator. It would give it to you as a decimal, which is fine, or you can write it improper. So if you'd like to write it 3/2 or mixed number 1 1/2, you can do it there, or you can change it to a decimal where you have 1.5 and 0.5. I don't care which form you do it, but if it's a nasty decimal, you need to make sure you write it as a fraction, okay? So being careful that you don't get like 0.3567, something like that. You want to make sure they're all nice decimals. Okay. The other part that we need to go through is finding the discriminant. And what the discriminant is actually the part underneath the square root that you already have been finding. That's called the discriminant. So this box up the top is just showing you that this is the discriminant, the b squared minus 4ac, the part under the square root. That's called the discriminant. If that number is positive, then you're going to have 2 solutions. If that number becomes 0, you will only have 1 solution. And if that number becomes negative, then you'll not have any solutions. So what it's doing is practicing finding that number and then checking to see if how many solutions I would have. So here's the first problem. 2x squared minus 3x equals negative 5. First step is always making sure this is equal to 0. So if it's not, I'm going to move this guy over. So my first job is I added 5 to this other side, so therefore that it's now equal to 0. Okay? My discriminant, you remember, is the b squared minus 4ac. So I wrote it out that 2 is my a, negative 3 is my b, and positive 5 is my c. So then I just plugged them in. So I put in negative 3 for b, 2 in for a, and 5 in for c. Now I'm just going to type it in one big string in my calculator. So negative 3 squared minus 4 times the a that we had times the c. And I end up with negative 31. So the discriminant was negative 31. Since this is negative, up here at the top it says if I'm negative, I have no solutions. So therefore, my answer is no solutions. Alright, you're going to pause the video and see if you can do the last question. So on the last question, again, we don't have it equal to 0. So we're going to move the 7 over, and in this case, since it's positive, it's going to become negative. So then my a, b, and c, I should have 6 is a, b is negative 5, 7 is, or negative 7 is c. So then I plugged them into my formula. Negative 5 is b, 6 is a, negative 7 is c. Now I'm going to just type that into my calculator, making sure I have correct parentheses, and you should be getting a positive 193. So that's my discriminant number. Since it's positive, up here at the top, it tells me if I'm positive that I'm going to have 2 solutions as my answer. So therefore, my answers are 193 and then 2 solutions. Okay, quadratic formula has lots of steps to it, so you really want to pay attention and just try and break it down into those 3 steps. Try doing the first step here, doing the step under your square root, and then doing the step at the bottom.